Well, good afternoon. I am Pastor Michelle here at Harmony Creek Church, and I wanted to share with you today, for those who weren't able to be with us in service, wanted to share with you my message for today, which is Pentecost Sunday. And I will not be reading from the scriptures, but I will just say it's Acts 2, 1 through 21. And it is the story when the Spirit came upon all of the people who were gathered and fell upon all of them. And then amazing things just started happening. And it is often referred to as the birth of the Christian church. And so Pentecost is a really big moment for us who follow Jesus, for us who may call ourselves Christians. And so, my friends, let us hear today's message. So Pentecost in the Greek translated is 50th. And so Pentecost is the 50th day after Passover. It's also the Jewish holiday of Shavuot, which is the Feast of Weeks, as it's called. And during that, the Jewish people would thank God for the land and the food that they grew. But they also, during that time, remembered the time when God made the covenant with Moses, when there was thunder and lightning and fire on the mountain. That was how God's presence came to be known and appeared to Moses. But on this particular Shavuot, because those who were gathered were celebrating Shavuot, that's what was happening during Pentecost. God showed up again in our reading from Acts. God's Spirit shows up in a big, powerful, and loud way, much like she did on that mountaintop with Moses. The scene goes that first there's this booming sound like thunder, and it filled the whole place. It filled all over. You could hear it for miles and miles, perhaps. But it wasn't thunder. It was more like a mighty wind. And after the wind, there was fire, or at least something that reminded them of fire, and it seemed to hover over all the disciples. And there's a lot of artwork that has been depicted about Pentecost, where they show people with flames above their head, and I love those imageries. And next year, when we do Pentecost at church, I would love to somehow have fire above our heads. Maybe not literal fire, to be clear. But what a sight it might have been, and what it may have looked like, what people were seeing in that moment. And essentially what this, all this represented, the different ways that God's Spirit showed up in the past. God's Spirit, she would show up in many ways in the Hebrew text, would show up as the breath of life. The Spirit shows up right at the beginning of Genesis, shows up as a burning bush to Moses, right? As a pillar of cloud and fire, perhaps, and as a storm on the mountain, as we discussed with Moses. But in this time, on this particular Pentecost, God's Spirit was showing up in almost all of these ways all at once. And it was showing up and pouring out on absolutely everyone. You see, most of the stories thus far in Scripture, the Spirit, God, would show up to individual people. Even some in the New Testament, like Mary, when God's Spirit shows up to Mary or Joseph, or even Jesus, when Jesus gets baptized, the Spirit comes down like a dove and says that you are my beloved. But in this moment, the Spirit just goes wild. The Spirit just comes out. I like to think of it. It's like God's Spirit. This is God's coming out story. And we see that the Spirit is not meant to be confined to just one person. The Spirit is meant to be let loose on everyone. And it changes everything, right? There's one of my favorite cartoonists is Naked Pastor. And he has one where it shows people in a church and they're holding the door. And on the other side is Jesus. And they're holding the door and they're like, don't let him in. It'll change everything. And I almost think of that like the Spirit, because once you let the Spirit in, God knows what could happen. The Spirit knows what could happen. And so it's a beautiful story. Pentecost really is. And what I love, and it's a story about chaos. It's more like Pente-chaos, right? Because so much is going on. People are talking in their own native tongue, and yet they're understanding everyone else in their own native language. Like it's hard to describe and that's one of the most miraculous parts of Pentecost, I think, is that everyone somehow comes together and understands one another but in their own way. So there's diversity, but yet people are their full selves, are in a space where they are their full selves. It's a lot to unpack when you really think about that aspect of it. Um, but this makes me think of a good communication story that I shared this morning. I really like this joke. It's a joke, I will say. So Clark checks into a hotel. He hops on his laptop to send an email to his husband, Kent, to let Kent know that he arrived safely. But Clark, he accidentally sends a message to the wrong email address. And without realizing it, he sends the message to a widow who had just returned from her wife's funeral. The widow checks her email and fainted when she read the email from Clark. Her son rushed in to help, and her son saw the email, and this is what the email said, and the email did not specify the sender's name. The email just said, "To my loving partner, I know you are surprised to hear from me. They have good Wi-Fi here, so people can send emails to loved ones. I've just been checked in. How are you? This place is really nice, but I'm lonely here. I have made necessary arrangements for your arrival tomorrow. I can't wait to see you." I like that joke. It's a funny joke, but it's a miscommunication, right? Because yes, he sent the email to the wrong person, and talk about a miscommunication error right there. But there was no miscommunication in the story of Pentecost, because in that moment, however long it lasted, everyone somehow, they were able to speak their own language, but yet understand one another. And that is a beautiful thing. Going back to our Pentecost, this story, as I said, it's God's coming out story. And it illustrates, I think, that God's love, God's spirit is always going to be moving outward. Maybe it starts inward and then it moves outward, because it's always going to be inviting more and more people in. And the church, and I like to think in this moment, we see that the church starts out in diversity. People from all walks of life, they find connection in that one moment. But sadly, the Christian church is they started out that way, but it hasn't ended up that way. We have lost that connection, and we don't seem as unified anymore. There are thousands upon thousands of different Christian churches. And I think at times we've allowed our doctrines, our beliefs to be more powerful than our love. We're scattered all over the place as a Christian church. And God forbid when churches are turning inward and not outward, because they're more focused on trying to make sure the church is pure and make sure you don't have the wrong people in the church. And that is not what church is supposed to be. That was not the Spirit's intention ever. God's Spirit from the get-go has been about pouring upon everyone. That's what I was trying to get there. And I will share that one of the examples I think of and what it could look like, because we all have different beliefs, which is true, right? And some beliefs we hold true, and we're not going to be apologetic about it. Like at our church, at Harmony Creek Church, we are radically welcoming to everyone, but especially the LGBT plus community. We want to make sure that when people walk through our doors, they know that they belong here, that they are God's beloved, because we are a place where people have come who have been hurt by the church for whatever reason, especially in this time of Pride Month. We want to make sure that people know that Harmony Creek Church is not only a safe place, but it's a brave space. We bravely hold space for everyone. And that's a belief we see everyone as God's beloved. And I think that's a belief we're going to hold true. That will be something we grasp, because that's a belief I hold so deeply. That is the foundation of my belief, that God is love, period. But going back, sorry, I got off when I was in seminary, I served at a church in Cincinnati, a UCC church called Pilgrim. And we had a chapel at Pilgrim, and we rented it out to a Pentecostal Hispanic church. And so there was like one person that spoke English. She was like the translator for everyone. And there was one Saturday where we decided we wanted to go and serve at the homeless shelter, at the food shelter in Cincinnati. And so we gathered together on a Saturday afternoon with the Pentecostal church. And as I said, like most of them spoke no English. And they were Pentecostal. And here we are, church with with me, a lesbian seminary intern, as I was called. But we gathered together. Our beliefs weren't anything that kept us apart on that day, because we were gathered together, maybe not all speaking the same language, but we kind of spoke the same language of love, if that makes sense. And we were speaking love. We were speaking feeding the hungry. That was our main purpose. We gathered together. We packed meals. We made lunches, and then we went and served the lunches at the food shelter. And that is like my vision of what church should be like. What the vision of the kingdom of God coming on earth as it is in heaven is, when people gather together to feed the hungry, to clothe the naked, to reach the lost, to spread the gospel of God's love. And what would it look like if churches did that more often? If we somehow put aside our petty differences to actually make a difference in the world around us? That's a soapbox for me. But I will say, and this is where it differs though, is that Pride. So we were at Pride yesterday as Harmony Creek Church. And I love that we go to Pride every year. And it's no small thing to have churches at Pride, because of the way churches have been to people in the Q+ community. So it speaks volumes that we were there, because the people see that we are a church that not only like believes that God is love, we live that out. We embody it by our very presence. And of course there were and there were protesters, right? Always. But I will say this, and I was thinking about this morning actually. And one of the things about God's Spirit, about God's love is, and this one is hard to accept, and this is a sermon for another day, but to realize too that as we were marching, people were shouting, and really loud and great, a lot of celebration, and so loud that we couldn't hear the protesters, which is great, but the thing that is hard about God's love and how it falls on everyone is that we know, right, that not only are the people marching in the parade, the people on the sidelines cheering us on, not only are they the God's beloved, but also the protesters are God's beloved as well. And and what's hard though, right? And this is where it gets sticky, and I don't have answers for it. But what's hard is that they may not have that same belief. They may not see us who are allies, or us who are Q+. They may not see us as God's beloved. And that's where it gets sticky. But I will always hold true to love. I will always grasp love when I can. And I think, we think about Pentecost, and I want to just point out that, it's this chaotic moment. But when you read the scripture, it doesn't seem like the people present were freaking out as much as they probably should have. There seemed to be a sense of calm, even in the chaos. And maybe it's because they could feel God's Spirit, and they knew that she would be with them. Sorry. Sorry. Okay, excuse me. I'm sorry. Let's just have a coughing fit during a sermon. I'm not re-recording this. This is all right. I'm going to finish up. Okay. They knew that the Spirit would be with them every step of the way. And they saw that Jesus followed through on Jesus' promise to send the Spirit. And as it says in the Gospel of John, send the Paraclete, which is more the comforter. But in the Pentecost story, it seems more the discomforter, which is okay. But even in that discomfort, even in that chaotic moment, they could, I feel like the people present could feel the Spirit was there. They were filled with the Spirit, and they, I think, could understand that they could do amazing things through the Spirit. And so I know that right now we're living in a world of chaos, a country of chaos, But I do believe that we can still have a sense of calmness. Like, take a deep breath. I don't want to cough again, but God's Spirit continues to move even today, even through every single person. We are all beloved, and that means the Spirit comes upon every single one of us. And because of that, we can do hard things. And one of the things I think we're called to do, as I going back to the protesters, yes, the protesters are God's beloved, but also we do need to speak up against the protesters, against not against them as people, but against what they're proclaiming. And what I love about Pride is that they had these angels, people dressed in white, and they were standing in front of the protesters, like protecting the march, protecting us who are marching, protecting us who are allies, us who are in the Q plus community. They were standing in front, and the protesters were at corners. So like you walk through the parade and you see them. And what I love is that so many people were just standing in front of them and shouting and just cheering us on. And so loud that you can't hear what the protesters are saying. You could hear like little bits of it, but for the most part, all you could hear was the music that was playing maybe, and people shouting affirmations of love. And they were drowning out the voices of hate. And that's what I think we're called to do as followers of Jesus Christ, even as human beings, not just even those of us even those people that may not believe in Jesus, even those who may find a higher power in different sources, which is fine. But I think as human beings, at the end of the day, we are called to step out in front of people who may be voicing hate. It's like we are metaphorically, even if we're called to step in front of haters and make our voice louder than theirs so that our voices of love carry even further than the voices of hate. We drown out the voices of hate. We stand up for justice. We stand up for a world that is for everyone. And during Pride Month, especially LGBT plus people. Because right now it is dangerous to be in the Q plus community. And as long as it's still dangerous for even me to exist as a lesbian, or even me to exist as a cis, someone that identifies as female but chooses to display my femaleness in a more masculine way, because I'm okay with that, it can be dangerous because, and I didn't mean to go this path, but I'm just saying that there's been times when I have been physically touched in bathrooms because people have escorted me out of women's bathrooms because they don't believe I'm a woman. So as long as that kind of stuff, and I can't even imagine for the trans community, but as long as that kind of stuff is still happening in our world, we need to let our voices of hate, or our voices of love, drown out the voices of hate. We need to be workers of justice. We need to be bold and be brave and be courageous with being workers of justice, because we are trying to create a world where everyone knows that they belong and that they are loved for exactly who they are, and they don't have to be anything less. And so at the end of the day, like the Spirit, like God's Spirit, our love should always move outward. We start with ourselves, obviously, love ourselves, and then we let that love move outward. And for those of us at Harmony Creek Church, we be bold in our witness to God's inclusive love, but we be bold as well in letting people know that churches like Harmony Creek Church exist. Because in a world where there are still churches out there who are spewing toxic theology and spewing and churches that exist with voices of hate, we need to be bold and we need to be loud with our love. And so, my friends, may you always know that you are God's beloved through and through. And let us be brave. Let us remember that we've got this. And also remember that love, at the end of the day, I think, even though sometimes it's hard to believe, love is always going to be more powerful than hate. Always. So let's be God's hands and feet in this world. Let's love one another and remember that you are loved. God bless you.